Postcards from Nebraska on RFD-TV, a program about rural life. This week, Roger Welsch takes a look at history through the eyes and hands of a very talented potter. It's tradition, it's culture, and it's all American. It's a parade. From bands and floats to everything else in between, see how one small town celebrates. Traveling by air from a big city can be a frustrating and time-consuming hassle. But at tiny Grand Island Airport, there's no long lines, and everyone is on a first-name basis. Plus, stop in at an antique store where art, history, and culture are all hidden among the clutter. It's all this week on Postcards from Nebraska.
In Nebraska, the earth is our principal resource. For better or worse, we mine our earth out on the Great Plains. From it come our agricultural products, our water, brick, cement, sand, almost everything we need. There's nothing people need more than art, especially in an environment as harsh as the plains. Out here, some of our art comes from the earth too. What kind of soil are you looking for? What's best?
Well, what this is called knuckles clay.
Nancy Fairbanks is a neighbor of mine and a friend for a lot of years.
This particular clay has a lot of orange or red in it, which means there's got to be a high content of iron in it. If you look off at the terraces...
Nancy's a potter. She made the bowl we use when we eat popcorn. Like the farmers around us, she makes her living and her art from our earth, transforming the very materials that grow corn into the vessels that can hold corn.
I like to work with my own forms just because it's more exciting. It's something different for me. You know, I do traditional forms for people when they ask for them, but I like to branch out from those and see how I can change them to make them fit what I want to do.
She's an artist, creating new forms, new colors, new ideas. In commercial clays she purchases for the purpose, and she's quite good at it. Her reputation is not simply a matter of local pride. Recently she was commissioned to make some of her iris pottery for the National Iris Association's convention. Nancy is a historian of sorts. She is part of a group of young people who are trying to relearn the skills of the Plains pioneers. They're also students of the Indians who occupied this landscape before the white man's invasion. Pre-Pawnee and Pawnee pottery shards and flint tools litter the land in this area. Nancy's been working as a potter, an experimenter to recreate the pottery forms of the Pawnee, sometimes copying them as carefully as possible, sometimes carrying traditional techniques over to her art.
They had a real primitive type of wheel, just a slab of stone or wood that they did turn with one hand or one foot as they worked the clay. A lot of the pieces were used to store the grains and seeds in for planting the next year. A lot of them were used for mixing their paints, their war paints and colors, mixing their food, for cooking their foods, and some of the pieces are sacred objects too that they believe were used in ceremonies.
When she imitates Pawnee pottery forms, for example, she makes pots from the native soils and with rounded bottoms, precisely as Pawnee women did before Nancy 1,000 years ago.
It's thought that they formed their pieces according to gourds, which is what they used before they started making clay pieces. They used the gourds to hold their water and cook the food in. And they grew up using the gourds, which were rounded on the bottom, so that was the natural thought for making the shapes of the pots.
And how did they make them stand up when they were encamped?
Well, they just dug a little hole in the ground and set the pot down in it so it wouldn't tip over.
Do you ever wonder about the women who were making the pottery 1,000 years ago in that fashion?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the different techniques they used and what was going on at that time.
How mad they were when their kids broke the pots.
That's right.
Nancy found that the colors of heat and clay did not reproduce the precise colors of Pawnee pottery found in this area.
Ooh, those coals are still red.
But then one day by accident she burned some feathers and animal fats in the kiln fire and found that the dark black colors of Pawnee pottery were reproduced exactly. It's kind of like a treasure hunt.
Mm-hmm. Feeling around for more pots.
I'll bet you do when you're experimenting with things. It's pretty exciting to see what it is that you've come up with after all the days of waiting.
It's exciting for the fire to burn down so you can see what happened.
There's something special for me in Nancy Fairbanks' work because it captures not only the past and the future in its lines and color, but also because it comes from the very earth that gives the plains and the people of the plains their life. Willa Cather wrote of the plains that they're not a country at all, but the material out of which countries are made. Neither is the earth of the plains, nor the people of the plains art, but the stuff from which art is made. Another quiet morning in Dannebrog, Nebraska. People are starting to stir, cars are starting to come into town. But the main street is roped off today because it's not just another quiet morning in Dannebrog. Hey George, what's going on?
Just a little celebration, I guess. I don't know, they just hired me to wash the street.
You know what's happening today?
I have no idea.
Do you know what's going on? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. It's time for this Danish town in America, this very Danish town, to celebrate Denmark's Independence Day. They'll be serving Ebbelskiver and Rollepuls over at Harriet's Cafe, Akavit and Gamle Dansk bitters at Eric's Big Table Tavern. There are Danish signs on the businesses, and the red and white Danish flag, the Dannebro, flies everywhere.
We're from Nebraska. A lot of Danes down there.
But a celebration like this is not simply a Danish festival. It's more than that. It's a chance to be something special. The best part about parades in Dannebrog is that no one hires designers or engineers to manufacture floats for its parade.
But we can't shut them off. We just got to slow the traffic and let them know that
That's Don Smith. He's a painter. And Jerry Blake, a farmer and businessman, planning the route of the march.
And it's going to turn before it gets to Malice.
So it's 2 in each bunch. There will be 1, 2,
Janet
3,
Jacobson
4,
is a
5,
beautician, and Pat White is the secretary over at the Farmers Co-op. But today they're organizers at the parade's starting mark.
Who do I follow then when they come down?
You'll be following the buggy with the king and the queen.
All right.
So you won't miss that.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. You got to go to First Street and come back into it. See.
The tension must be high. George McCarg is smoking again.
Put him in place. Okay. Yeah.
What kind of parade can a town like Dannebrog, population 380, put on? Well, here it comes. The main street is only 1 block long, but this parade is a mile long and will take a full hour to pass by. The floats have been built in local garages and backyards. They are sometimes decorated with wildflowers picked in the ditches outside of town. That's yucca from over at 5 Mile Corner.
Here are people I know sitting on the curb, watching people I know drive by in all kinds of strange contraptions. Sometimes they're things that they've made themselves. Sometimes they're vehicles that I've seen them driving out in the fields. What a peculiar thing for human beings to do, this thing called a parade. Why do we do it?
Sure, it's a chance for families to get together. It's an opportunity for politicians to be seen and for the local merchants to make a few dollars off of visitors. There's Ray Grimm, for example, who's been making the popcorn for every event in Dannebrog for decades.
1923. the date right there.
He has some competition today. Passengers on many of the floats are handing out and throwing out popcorn and candy. 1945. There is a Miss Junior Miss Nebraska and 2 Mrs. Nebraskas. But why all this trouble for a parade? Events that took all winter to plan and floats that took days, even weeks to build, are down the main street and out of the spotlight in only a moment. This parade transforms Dannebrog's main street into a pageant. That's why.
Sometimes it doesn't go off the way you want it to.
And our friends we see every day here in town, that's Mel, he runs the service station, but today he's driving a tractor, become actors, personalities, showmen for this magic moment. A parade sweeps away for a couple of hours the worry about the crops and drugs, petty feuds and family problems. For this day, Dannebrog is not just another little town in central Nebraska. For a couple of hours, with the help of a parade's pageantry, we celebrate. We celebrate Dannebrog, and we celebrate ourselves.
When I moved to rural Nebraska 3 years ago, I knew there'd be things I'd miss. There are, after all, advantages to living in the city. An airport, for example. These days, every town and everybody needs an airport. Now, the nearest airport to my farm at Dannebrog is Grand Islands. It's not O'Hare, but it is an airport.
Grand Island Tower, this card 16035. We're outside Mid-America over here for takeoff.
Cessna 038, no further reports necessary at that altitude. Grand Island altimeter is 3044.
Thank you, sir.
Every time I get into an airplane, I know that I'll be stopping over at Chicago's O'Hare, because you can't get from Nebraska to anywhere else in the world without going through O'Hare first. In Nebraska, we say that when we die, the first thing we'll do is go to O'Hare and transfer, each to our final destination.
Please observe the city ordinance which restricts smoking at O'Hare International Airport.
O'Hare is what every airport aspires to be. Bustling, crowded, high-tech walkways and fancy architecture, long lines, frantic faces, money changing hands, luggage piling up, exotic languages and faces, jammed parking lots, taxis and buses. Life at the Grand Island Airport is less hectic, much less hectic. When I moved out here, I wondered if I'd be able to handle the big step down. The closest airplanes come to Dannebrog, after all, is when they fly overhead, 7 miles straight up. I was absolutely certain that the Grand Island Airport would be a traveler's nightmare. So for a year or so, I actually drove the 150 miles to Omaha or Lincoln to catch flights. Eventually, I forget when or why, I found myself in a situation where I had to fly out of Grand Island. When I depart from Grand Island, I'm not greeted by long lines of frustrated flyers, no baggage handlers, no security guards, no panhandlers. Sometimes when things are slack, there's not even anyone behind the ticket counter. Dan? Dan? When I get off a flight in Grand Island, I know where Linda will meet me. Gate 1 or Gate 2, because that's all we have. Gate 1 and Gate 2. I know which carousel my luggage will arrive at, the Grand Island Airport's only luggage carousel. Which is not to say that now and then luggage doesn't still go astray.
Yes, I have a blue bag.
Is this it?
No.
I know my luggage made it to Grand Island because I looked out the window there and saw Dan unload it. I know his name because Dan Martinez is one of the 2 ticket agents in the whole airport. As I said, O'Hare it's not.
It's just going around in a circle.
Oh, I see.
That's not mine.
this one, right?
This is fine.
I'll take this.
No,
You take the big one.
I'll take them both.
The restaurant at the Grand Island Airport is like a mom's cafe, and the bar is open from 5 to 7, just long enough for one jolt of courage for uneasy flyers.
Well, it's good to have you here.
Well, good to be here.
When folks leave the Grand Island terminal, they don't have trouble finding their car. It's 20 steps from the terminal door. And paying for parking doesn't take long, because the parking is free.
And how many bags would you like checked here? Just one. Thank you, sir.
Must be Mom-in.
Yep.
Okay. No, I don't.
The big problem with the Grand Island Airport is that it's 20 minutes from my farm. But I suppose that's about as much time as most city dwellers take just to get out of their airports. Besides, it takes me about that much time to shake off the tension of travel and settle back into the easy life of Dannebrog. It's a terrible price to pay for country living, but it's a price I think I can afford.
And now, a Postcards from Nebraska Extra.
I get quite a bit of mail, and this time of year, a lot of it's seed catalogs. Now, I've never paid much attention to them because, for one thing, I've never had any luck growing things. But besides that, I've wondered why anyone would put so much energy into taking care of something that seems to do pretty well on its own. I used to drive down highways seeing nothing alongside me but greens and browns, now and then some blues or yellows. Then for some reason or another I started looking more closely at those splashes of color. Some of them, like spiderwort and salsify, are only seen in the morning, fading away every day before the noon sun. Penstemon and yucca signal the onset of summer, but they're inconspicuous by midsummer. Daisy fleabane, poppy mallow are with us through most of the summer. We don't have any pictures of showy milkweed, swampy smartweed, or ironweed, but I love the names anyway. Botanical poetry. You see, now when I glance sidelong into the ditches and fields, I see old friends, wild roses and yarrow, not just weeds, but flowers. Now, I'm not a botanist. I'm not even an expert. I do know this is hairy vetch, but half the time when people ask me what some plant is, I have to confess, I don't know. I have trouble particularly with yellow flowers. I don't know what this is, or this. When I do remember the name of this plant or another, scientifically inclined friends complain that I use popular rather than scientific terminology. I prefer daisy fleabane to Erigeron strigosus because I admire the poetry of daisy fleabane. I think that's one of the reasons the wildflowers that decorate our ditches are so interesting. They have personality. They insist on growing where you don't want them. Where you do want them, nothing. Even the most humble flowers, common bindweed, meadow salsify, yellow clover, are all the more beautiful because they're a bonus. We expect to find flowers in a garden, but here, on a roadside, in the ditch, it's the difference between buying a rose and receiving one as a gift. I guess I like wildflowers not simply because they're flowers, but because they're wild. A museum is a place where artifacts from the past inspire us to lofty thoughts. That's what the word museum means, a place for the muses. Dannebrog, Nebraska is in Howard County. And Howard County, like so many others, has in its county seat its own historical village and museum. Small towns on the plains have another kind of museum, one with all those features and more. A lot of folks miss these places, however, because they're not often labeled museum. I'm thinking of the small town antique store.
Is there anything in particular?
No, I just always heard about this place and I just decided to
come in and see it. That's good.
Unlike most formal museums, here in Dannebrog's Century Antiques, you can pick up the items on display, feel them, smell them, and if you really like them, buy them and take them home for you for your own museum. In some antique stores, shopping falls more into the category of archaeology or even salvaging than shopping.
And then, I don't know if you noticed this little gold scale here.
Pat Ryan, proprietor of the Dannebrog Antique Store, keeps her place a little too neat for my taste, but there are some corners where exploring is a definite possibility. Pat, what was this?
That's a rabbit feeder.
Is that right?
Yes.
Some antique dealers are more like museum curators than others and don't seem very eager to let folks buy the items they've accumulated.
Did you see that potato scrubber over there?
But Pat even goes to the trouble of picking things up that she thinks might be of particular interest to me. Potato scrubber. Do you ever have things that you really hate to sell that you'd rather keep here?
I used to be that way. Anymore, I maybe keep them a while, then get tired of them and want something different. So.
Well, I've had the feeling that some antique dealers like to hang on to their things because they just hate to see them leave the store.
That's right. And there's a lot of things that I've sold that I should have kept that I cannot find now, you know, that are really scarce.
Well, I hope some of those things are the things I bought.
Well, maybe some of the things, yes. But like your books, I see that you like books and old things like that.
The last time I was here, Pat had set aside for me this little book on old-time settlers. She felt so strongly that I should have it, she just gave it to me. It's not a good way to make money, I suppose, but a great way to keep customers. And while I was going through the things that she'd accumulated since the last time I was here, I found this 1949 annual from the now-defunct Dannebrog High School. What great fun looking at the childhood pictures of people who are now a good deal older. There's Gary Steffenhagen and Mel Grimm. There's Rod Hatt, bless his soul. All this for only 75 cents. A lot of people, I understand, buy antiques as an investment. But when I go into an antique store, I like to buy things I can use. A lot of things are hard to find on store shelves these days, so I go to our local antique store and pick them up there. And old things are often better made than new things anyway, so I buy some things here at the antique store in order to find the best quality. I know better than to use those words that antique dealers universally hate. My grandmother used to have one just like this when I was a kid. I think she threw it away. And now look at this, $16. Art, history, technology, folklore, it's all here in this little informal country museum. And treasures, too. Hey, Linda, look at this.